Where's Rona in that very moment? Is the camera like beautiful and floating and excited because she's in love and happy? Or is the camera like messy and, stumbles with her and unclear and unsure because she's drunk? Or is the camera very static and cold and neutral because she's in rehab?
Welcome to this special ScreenCraft conversation. We are excited to have acclaimed director Nora Fingscheidt here to discuss the adaptation of best-selling memoir of Amy's Liptrot, The Outrun. With educational resources, industry insights, and direct connections to agents, managers, and producers, ScreenCraft helps writers advance their careers. And ScreenCraft serves as a bridge between emerging talent and the film and television industry, aspiring and professional writers, giving them the tools they need to succeed. So from Noha's critically acclaimed fiction debut, System Crasher, premiered in 2019 at the Berlin International Film Festival, where it won a Silver Bear, which is the Alfred Bear Award. It subsequently won 8 German Film Awards and was Germany's entry to the Oscars in 2020. Noha then went on to direct The Unforgivable, a Netflix feature starring Sandra Bullock about a woman who comes out of prison after 20 years. The Outrun, starring four-time Oscar nominee Saoirse Ronan, is Noha's third feature film and is from Amy's best-selling memoir, which has won many awards as well. So she continues to work both in documentary and fiction, as well as with full-length films and shorts. So today we delve into the intricacies of literary adaptation and explore how writers can take on the dual role of both writing and directing their own films. It's a pleasure, Noha, to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I'll jump right in. The Outrun obviously is based on Amy's best-selling memoir. What was your approach to adapting such a personal and introspective piece into the cinematic experience?
Yeah, you mentioned it already. It's a very, very internal book. And the producer, Sarah Brockhurst, she sent me the book via email. At that point, Saoirse Ronan was attached to star and produce already. So I read the book with Saoirse in mind. And for the first half, I thought, okay, there's no film. This is unadaptable, because her book started off as an internet blog. And it almost feels like you read someone's diary. It's so internal. It's just like a thought process of memory layers. It jumps in 4 timelines in one sentence. But then the more I got sort of into the location and into her character and all that, with Saoirse in mind, I thought, okay, maybe there is an adaptation, but it would need to be quite radical, in terms of it needs to keep the nerdiness of her character alive. And we have to embrace the fact that this is a woman going into isolation, spending 2 winters by herself on a tiny remote island in a tiny cottage, but then chats with astronauts. Like this is very, I mean, who would do that? There is something very bizarre in this act, but it's also very moving, and moving image about somebody lonely seeking connection. You go to the end of the world and you chat with astronauts. So then knowing that Saoirse would play that role gave some sort of a safety net, because not it was clear, half the film will be just, her by herself on a tiny island. Not many actresses can pull that off.
Mm.
So I think, that was sort of my process when reading the book. Then I met with Amy and Saoirse and the producers, and I pitched them what I call the nerd layer. I said, of course, we need to, have the Orkney layer, how she's healing, and the London layer, see how things went down. But we also need sort of the nerd layer, which is her weird thought process of seeing the world and having, philosophical thoughts about it and immersing herself in science and stuff. Um, they loved it, and then we created a name. I think, step one, I pitched my approach. Step two, we found a name in order to create a healthy distance. And then I went into solitude with the book
Mm.
for, I would say, 3 or 4 months, because it is, Saoirse has been to Orkney. It is Amy's story. I'm German. I had to Google where the Orkney Islands are. I was living in LA. It was lockdown. I couldn't even fly over to get to know the Orkneys. I was like, how on earth do I find my way into this? And so I sat down with the book and I color coded the different sections. Orkney, London, folklore, acoustic elements, childhood, teenager times. And I went through the book and then I went through it again and I wrote on different colored card piles, the bits that I thought need to be in the film. And then I spent days arranging those cards. And then I wrote a beat sheet out of that. And that one I then shared with Amy and the producers and Saoirse. And from there on, we worked together really closely. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and it definitely feels like you, when watching the film, you feel the isolation that you probably went through because it was locked down. So I'm sure that translated into the writing and the film direction as well, because it was during a time where everyone was isolated. So that's an interesting point that you made there. And I'm glad that you guys were able to work through it, even though it was like a tumultuous time.
Yeah.
That kind of goes into my other question of like themes of isolation and recovery in the Outrun. What were the key visual and narrative elements that helped translate these emotions to the screen?
Mm, I think our biggest sort of, red line or the thread that runs through, I don't know how you say that in English, the mantra, was there is a line in the book which says, "The edge is my home, the edge is where I come from."
Mm.
And it really is, she grew up on that farm that you see in the film. It's right next to those massive cliffs. You grow up in the middle of those gales and that heavy nature and the lambs that are being born and they die and all that. How is she shaped by those extremes? That was something that was definitely important, that no matter what she does, there is a certain level of extremity to it. Like she doesn't do things 50%, she goes full on. She doesn't go to the club 3 times a week, she goes 5 times a week.
Yeah.
It's like she doesn't go to a tiny island for 2 months. She spends a winter by herself. I think that is part of Amy's character, and that is something that we really wanted to translate also visually. Mm, and then we thought it is about a woman in a place. It's a story about reconnecting to the city, or to not to the city, to the place where you grew up in and that shaped you, the culture that you sort of ran away from, but we all can't help it. Where we grow up, how we grow up influences who we are today. And so it was, and she chose one extreme for the other, because Orkney is extreme, but London is also extreme. London's like never sleeps. There's always some sound going on.
Mm.
And so how could we contrast those two places through the colors, through the images, through the sound, that we always sort of are thrown and torn between those two extremes.
Yeah, I love that. And you definitely felt it through the film for sure. And were there any challenges that you faced when transitioning from the writing stage to directing? And how did you overcome that? Because you have a vast history of doing that.
Yeah, a lot of challenges. I mean, again, this book is an unadaptable beast in a way. It's like, oof, and we all knew that all throughout. It's like, how do you do that to make it into a feature film narrative? And I think at some point we got a script that was working as a script. But when we shot it and we edited it along the script order, it didn't work at all. We had a rough cut. It was 3.5 hours. Um, there were the film still jumps in timelines, but in the script it was even more, and it was throughout the film until the end. Mm. And the problem with that was that there were so many storylines about her best friend in London, and she ruins that poetry reading. There was this guy in rehab, Saeed, and he had a deadly overdose, and like there were many more stories that then through the editing process we had to lose because we found out like all these things that read so great on the page are now cannibalizing each other. At
Mm,
some point, you were like, oh, am I supposed to care about the boyfriend or the guy in rehab or about her dad? Or wait, is it about the best friend? And it was sort of so many little stories that it was like we're losing Rona
mm,
almost. And so we had to reduce and reduce and reduce and combine all those back and forth bits into longer bits. So first time I think we go to London, we spend there 20 minutes almost,
mm, mm,
Um, and this is very different, the order than it was in the script. And then the second half now, when Rona is on Papa Western, the tiny island after her relapse, she sort of slowly really grounds herself and comes to terms with her past. And with her, now the narration calms down. At the beginning, she's all over the place. She's in Orkney, but she doesn't want to be there. So we're in London and back and forth. And then when she arrives in the present tense, the narration calms down as well. And I think in the last 25 minutes of the film, we're just in Orkney
mm.
and nowhere else. And that is something, yeah, I wish I had known while writing the script. It would have saved us a lot of shooting days, you know,
I'm
and a
sure.
lot of great scenes that didn't make it into the film.
Mm,
Sadly, for the fantastic actors,
mm,
who did their magic there. Um, but when you write a scene like Rona walks along the shore and takes her headphones off and she hears the sea like she'd never heard it before.
mm.
It's like what? 3 lines. Even if you try to write a little bit more about how it sounds, it's still okay. Then you maybe get to a third of a page. But it's very hard to trust that. I think if you would read now the last 45 minutes of the film in a script, you would think like, what? She sits at the beach, she writes, she has a call with her mom, they go swimming.
Yeah.
So like this is boring. But yeah, I think that was sorry for talking so long. It's a monologue, but that was really a process and it took us 8 months in the
Wow.
editing to figure out how we need to adapt this script structure into an actual now film structure that works.
That is a lot. That is a lot of editing. 8 months. That's insane. But yeah, the story is so layered. So I could see how and why it would take you this long. So kudos to you for figuring that out. It was like it was a hard transition.
Yeah,
I want to
we,
take it
we
a little.
we have a great editor,
Oh,
Stefan Bechinger.
oh, that's amazing. Yeah, no, the editing, I it was insane because it's layered and it goes through so many stories, but I didn't feel overwhelmed watching it. So that's why I was like, I want to figure out how did you get to that place. But that's amazing. And I kind of want to take it a little personal with your journey, because you've directed films with powerful emotional cores as well, in the past. And do you have any advice for writers who are interested in directing their own scripts, particularly when it comes to maintaining their vision during the production?
Yeah, good question. It's always so hard with general advices, because each project's different. Each constellation is different. I made those 3 feature films and they were like so different production circumstances. System Crasher was a tiny film with zero budget, completely off under the radar. But that gave me 100% creative control because, I had written the script for 4 years, I had researched everything. So the few people who came on board didn't do it for the money or the fame or anything. They just loved the story and thought it needed to be told. And a lot of people did not believe in that story. And, a lot of distributors went like, film about a violent little girl who's going to want to see that, you know? So we didn't have big aspirations. My hope was as far as my ambition went until let's get this film done. You know?
That makes sense.
So my advice to sort of first time filmmakers would be to really, really, really um, make a film in which story you believe that it needs to be told. You know, it's very dangerous to do too many compromises on your first film. I think System Crasher had the impact because we had so little money, we had so much creative freedom, we could go pretty radical with the storytelling. Um, of course, you have to do other compromises then. If you have no money, there are lots of scenes you can't shoot, you know, lots of your locations you can't afford, lots of extras, no way, you know, you have to, it's like you're playing roulette and you need to choose where to put the ships. But my personal experience is the more one believes the story has to be made, the more sense it makes because there will be difficult times. You know, there were times where we didn't get the fundings, we didn't find financiers, we didn't find distribution. And I always thought like, oh my God, another year of a push, this film never going to get made. Um, but I kept on going because I thought this character has to be seen on screen. You know, Benny, this wild little crazy girl, she has to be on screen. Um, and then yeah, so that would be my advice for like let's say first time directors or people you know who maybe have written scripts but now will go into producing or directing their first one. Choose the right people, you know, choose people that you trust and that share the same vision and make sure you do this film for the same reasons. You know, it can get very complicated when you work in a team and suddenly you realize, oh, they are actually going on two different journeys in terms of what is the outcome supposed to be.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen often. I think it's not uncommon. And then it's clear to always get everybody on board creatively in terms of what are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really important to have everyone on board. And I've heard plenty of times where that hindered production. That's great advice. And can you share a little bit of some strategies or techniques that might help writers who are stepping behind the camera for the first time?
Stepping behind in terms of directing their own
Yep.
scripts.
Directing their own film.
Because I've never been a screenwriter, you know, I was always like, I started directing, I've always directed what I've written,
Hmm.
or I've directed what other people have written, but I've never written something that other people directed, if that makes sense. So I don't really know how that is. I imagine it quite painful at times. You got to really find the right director
Yeah.
because you put something there and then you know you give your baby to somebody else, and
Mm.
at some point you got to let go. So I think being a professional screenwriter is quite a tough job.
Mm.
Somehow, me personally, I find directing easier than writing because when you're directing something, uh, even if you have no idea, people are gonna come with ideas. You know, a DOP will have an image, or a production designer creates a mood board, or a costume designer, you know, shows you some option of clothes, and you can go, oh, this and that and that.
Yeah.
As a writer, you have a blank page. It doesn't propose you any ideas, you know, you're stuck with your voice in your head. Mine usually is pretty destructive in terms of this is boring. Nobody wants to see that. Has been done before. Oh my God, that bad dialogue. Like that's my inner and so I really have to go through this painful process of making this voice shut up in terms of, yes, I know this is really bad dialogue, but maybe I just need to get it out, and then on a rewrite we can do it better. You know, it's like, ah.
Vicious cycle.
So I love, I mean, I know so many writers who love writing and they have to write, and
Yeah.
even if they have half a day, they sit down and they invent a new story and something. I'm not one of those people. For me, it's a necessity.
Yeah.
When it comes to directing, I can say, trust your crew, you know. Directing is not about controlling people. I see directing more as conducting an orchestra. I can't act. I can't hold a camera. I can't put the lamps that they look nicely, I just can make sure that when I see it on my little monitor on screen, it all sort of fits together. But I want to encourage the people to bring as much creativity as they can. And they have to want to make the best job, and feel respected artistically. So yeah, it's this image of, conducting an orchestra, which for me comes the closest to how I would define directing.
Wow. Yeah, that was a beautiful description. I was like, that just put a light bulb. I was like, oh, that's a wonderful description of directing. I love that. You're like putting everybody together and kind of giving them the tools to work with. I love that. And so back to the Outrun, the film is set against the backdrop of, the Orkney Islands. How did the location influence your storytelling and direction?
Yeah, quite a bit. At first I thought, okay, yeah, we have to shoot in the Orkneys because it needs to feel as real as possible, but we can't go to the real locations because that's way too close to Amy's life. But the more we went up there and we researched, the more clear it became like we didn't find any other farm that, wasn't working and was okay to have a film team on. So we ended up, and then I was always like, hey, Amy, would you mind us shooting? How do you feel about us shooting on your farm? And she's like, well, that's how I envision it anyways, Nora. So just go for it. So we ended up shooting, we became stalkers of her life. We ended up shooting on the real farm where she grew up, in the house where she grew up as a child, in her dad's real caravan where her real father lives in the places where she had the AA meetings on Orkney. The Rose Cottage that you see in the film is the real Rose Cottage where she wrote the book for Two Winters. So it became somewhat, at some point, I just had to let go. And it became this bizarre experience of half fiction, half documentary. We always had to change the shooting schedule and adapt to the weather. So sometimes, we always had to leave some space for the unexpected magic to happen in a way. Yeah, we got very lucky by the support of the locals in front of the camera and behind the camera. We had the rough idea of what we knew we needed, but then we had no idea how it's going to be. We knew we wanted to recreate this art festival, the Gyro Nights, but that takes place in February. So we had to ask locals, can you do that for us? And they were like, yeah, yeah, sure. When and where? And all of a sudden we start filming and they have these weird masks on and goggles and like fire. And we're like, whoa, we didn't expect that on a tiny Scottish island. This
Yeah.
is cool. I would have never imagined of writing something like that,
That's
you
amazing.
know?
That's amazing. They like kind of were extras in a way and they were
Yeah.
for it. That's so cool. I love that. That makes me love the film even more. That's so cool. And so this is what I thought when I first was watching the film. The camera movement was amazing. It made me feel like I was literally in the film, and experiencing pretty much what Amy was experiencing. It was in the beginning very unstable. Was this intentional, and what feelings did you plan to evoke with the camera movement?
Yeah, so we try to just, always start from where's Rona in that very moment. Is the camera like beautiful and floating and excited because she's in love and happy? Or is the camera like messy and, stumbles with her and unclear and unsure because she's drunk? Or is the camera very static and cold and neutral because she's in rehab and sober? And so I think, yeah, that's where the DOP and I, we always sort of start to talk about the shots, like how does she feel in that very moment and how can we convey that through the visuals.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And as both a director and writer, how do you balance staying true to source material while infusing your own creative vision?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, is especially for this project, because it is not just a novel that we were adapting, it's a memoir. So it's Amy's real life, you know. I've said at the beginning, in order to have my own vision, I had to have 3, 4 months by myself with the book. But after that, it was really important for me to make sure she is on board with every creative decision that we have to make. Because, of course, it's just a feature film. It can never be as complex as a book, and the book can never be as complex as a real life, right? So you have to simplify, be concise, dramatize, you know, in order to find an essence of something. But this essence still has to be true to the book and the real life. And it also comes with a, if you make a film about somebody's life and she's not a celebrity who's used to having her life being thrown out on the street every day, you know, it comes with a massive responsibility, because I will move on to the next film. Saoirse will move on to the next film. Amy has to live with this film forever. Her parents will have to live with this film forever. They live in a tiny community, you know, and I wanted that even after the film is out, they walk proudly and happily through the streets of Kirkwall. And in order to make sure that happens, for me, it was clear to open the process to Amy as much as I could. So she could read every script version. We spent hours on the phone discussing them. She saw the rushes of what we were shooting every day. She could see every edit version that she wanted. You know, sometimes she was like, do your thing, you know, send me an update in 2 weeks or something. But also, before we went into production, her parents read the script. I wanted to be sure that they know about of every scene that we're shooting, and don't go like, oh, we don't want that to be. They had a chance to say veto, actually, and they didn't do that because they wanted to support their daughter. Of course, they're not proud of the family history, but they're very proud of their daughter. And so it is a very painful aspect, and there have been a lot of tears, you know, during the making of the film, but especially when, you know, they saw the first cut versions, Amy saw the first cut version. It's a very, very emotional process, but it's also very enriching and inspiring because it is so real, you know, and it's so human in a
Yeah.
way.
Very much so. And I felt it while watching the film. Thank you so much, Noha. This was a fantastic conversation. And thank you for talking to our ScreenCraft audience. And for all watching, remember to go see the Outrun in theaters October 4th this month. And check screencraft.org for more inspiration and guidance on screenwriting and filmmaking. Thank you so much, Noha.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.